This is where we're looking at tutorials as well, and you have concepts. Okay, getting started. Introduction to using origami. I think this is crucial. We definitely need to look at this one, and then we can probably move on forward once we've done with this. What are they talking about, and whatnot? Let's check.
Welcome to Origami. We'll be building this simple prototype, and by doing so, learning the fundamental building blocks of using Origami. We'll also learn how to import from design tools such as Sketch and Figma. Follow along by downloading the lesson files that accompany this tutorial, and if you haven't already, download the latest version of Origami from origami.design. Importing from design tools like Sketch and Figma is as simple as copying and pasting. To import from Sketch, make sure you have the Sketch file from the Getting Started lesson open. Next, select the photo layer and info group from the city's artboard and hit Command-C to copy. In a new origami file, hit Command-V in the canvas view to paste in the sketch layers. Don't worry if your layers have shifted over a bit. We'll fix this later on. To import from Figma, you'll need to install the Origami plugin from the Figma plugin community. Launch the Figma Origami plugin and select the photo layer and info group in the city frame. Then click the Copy Selected Layers button in the plugin. In a new origami file, hit Command-V in the canvas view to paste in the Figma layers. Let's take a quick tour of the origami interface. On the left-hand side of our is the layer list, where we see the layers from the canvas. We should see our Golden Gate Bridge photo layer and info group that we imported here earlier. To the right of that is the viewer. This is where we can see and interact with our prototype as if it were on our mobile device. On the right-hand side of origami is the inspector, which lists out all the properties of the currently selected layer. The middle section of origami is split between two views. The canvas view on top, where we lay out our prototype layers, and the patch editor on the bottom, where we create the logic for our prototype's interactions, animations, and behavior. You can adjust the split view between the canvas and patch editor.
I think right off the bat, this is definitely a prototyping tool. Like Principle, for example, I'm familiar with the most similar tool I've used probably was Principle. It seems very similar to that. It has this important. I think it has a better importing ability. Um, Cross-platform. What can I say? Basically adaptability, right? So you have this ability to kind of like move the elements from your sketch or figma file easily over here, but essentially what you're trying to do is create animations and prototype things. Yeah, that's pretty much what origami is at this point. I think does it's not a replacement of figma at all. I don't know why it was coined that way from what I've heard. But yeah, let's move on forward.
By dragging between the two views, or by toggling the patch editor in the toolbar. After pasting in our layers from Sketch or Figma, you may have noticed that our layers got shifted over a bit. Let's fix this by selecting the photo layer and info group from the layers panel and dragging to the left until those layers are centered. Now that we've set up our layers, the first thing we want to do is...
It's really funny. I mean, I was looking at this and I realized I back before UI UX buzz, and when there was obviously no design tools. This is back in 2010 or um, between that era, sort of like more than a decade ago. So weren't we using, like a lot of you folks probably were familiar with uh, Flash and then now Animate. We used to do a lot of these keyframe animations and motion tweens. Anybody who's familiar with Macromedia Flash and then the transition to Adobe Flash and then Animate it is called, I suppose now. I used it a little bit recently. It's still the same similar tool, and it still has the same sort of issues It breaks down sometimes. It if it's overloaded with a lot of keyframes and all that. I mean, it's the same thing. But it just reminds me of that. I don't know why Adobe didn't really transition that tool to for this purpose as well. Kind of purpose it somehow or create a different kind of like a module for designing interactions within that tool. It would have been amazing because the same kind of in sort of workflow kind of applies to it, how it works. So again, most of you who are familiar with Flash would understand what I'm trying to say. I think it's very similar to that, and the animation capabilities are similar, but there are obviously a lot of other things that you can do on Flash. There's rigging and bone tools and things like that. There's so much fun stuff that you can do. So I think there's a lot of adaptability there, but I think it will only focus on its probably primarily for adaptability with XD, even if it did that in hindsight, is thinking about it. Um, but yeah, Flash seems like an amazing tool that could have been for this purpose, I guess.
Is add an interaction to our photo layer. To add an interaction to a layer, hover over the layer in the layer panel, click on the circle icon on the layer, and then click Tap. This is our first patch, an interaction patch. We'll cover patches in more detail a little bit later on, but for now, let's just keep an eye on our down and tap outputs of our patch, while tapping on the photo in the viewer. You'll see that both of these outputs will light up corresponding to when I press down and when I release, which equals a tap. We want this to transition between two values of scale, a scale of 1, which is what we have now, and a scale of whatever fits into the screen, which is about 0.31. The next patch we need to add is a transition patch, since we want to eventually transition between these two values. We can add another patch by double tapping the patch editor, typing define transition, and then hitting return. Let's put these two values as our two inputs on the transition patch. Make the start input 0.31, since we know that's the scale that fits the photo in the screen. And the end value should be 1, which it's already at by default. Next, we want to connect us pressing down on the photo to transitioning between those two values. Let's connect the down output of our purple interaction patch to the progress input of the transition by clicking and dragging from the down output into the progress input of the transition patch.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if you're doing all of that effort. This is quite a lot of work that you have to do for prototyping, and it depends upon if the stakeholders kind of require this in the wherever you work, right? If the bosses want to see that level of detail when it comes to interaction, and I'm sure they can use that, but this is obviously a lot of effort and time that goes into it. That the resource, if there's a limited resource, for example, in a lean team that might not be able to pull off. There's a lot of effort, obviously. You need that kind of bandwidth for within a limited amount of designers you may have within the team. So it's like, yeah, interesting. If you have a huge team, one person can be dedicatedly just working on the prototyping aspect of things. And the other thing that I just paused this video for was I was thinking about um, the fact that can you export these animations in a digestible format in an XML format or whatever, I don't know exactly, for the coders to actually uh, leverage this, use this somehow for just translating it completely as this is being done over here. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances. There's lot of things that would go in the background. For example, when you integrate something like this into your own actual code, but is it a possibility somehow? Then it kind of justifies the amount of effort that would go on into this. Otherwise, I mean, in certain scenarios, you can do a lot of prototyping extensively, but I see a lot of designers doing this, and it's just showcasing their own skill set, like their abilities in terms of as an interactive designer to conjure up these different ideas, amazing animations, kind of translate aesthetically great sort of like visuals for the audience overall, and then just gaining some sort of like audience overall from the design folks and potential clients as well. But in the end of the day, in within a company, when you're working for example, even for an existing product or something that's being done new, I think the only possibility where you'd be putting that kind of an effort in a lean team, specifically, you know what I'm talking about, like where you have two, three designers who are they're working on designs pretty much, and then there's nobody else, and most of the team is basically the coding muscle that you would have in that kind of an environment. I think the only reason why you'd be doing this and justifying that kind of effort would be for that if this is, you know, in that sort of like time frame, you are trying to, you know, gain some sort of like as a presentation aspect, like you're trying to present it to, for example, potential investors or something to get funding, I guess. Yeah, because you're building like elaborate designs and interactions to showcase how this might work. Sorry for the traffic noises. Sorry.
We want this transition to affect the photo scale. Let's connect this transition to the photo scale by clicking and dragging from the transition patch output to the scale property of the photo. Alright, so you can see now that as you press down on the photo, the transition occurs instantly between 0.31 and 1. The thing you want to do is add a little animation to this. So let's make and the transition patches. Let's then
Okay, again, I have to pause this and say something while I'm thinking about this. So this is good, but they should apply like an automatically an animation, and then you can change that later on. Something that is ubiquitous, not ubiquitous, sorry, something that is more mainstream and something that's generally used overall. Like for example, when you cut between a clip, and you intuitively should be able to add like a transition to it, something along those lines, I guess. So it should add a general and a generic animation, and then you can change that as well rather than adding an element of animation. Of course you need an animation, of course you do. You can get rid of it, of course, but you're snapping to that the other instance is just very snappy, and doesn't very scrappy as well, I think. Seems doesn't seem like an intuitive approach, I guess, just saying.
double tap patch editor, type to find animation, and then press return when we get a pop animation. Insert this patch between the interaction and transition patches by connecting the down output from the interaction patch to the number input of the pop animation patch, the progress input of the pop animation patch to the progress input of the transition patch. You'll start to see now that everything in Origami flows from left to right. Now when I press down on the photo, the transition is eased or animated. We can change some of these animation settings in pop animation to have a completely different feel. Alright, this is great. But we want this transition.
Yeah, so it's just as generic, like sort of an animation where there's probably a little bit of you know, a bounce effect you can see. It's a smooth transition, very good, but the only thing is this pop animation. What are they calling it? Yeah, pop animation. I mean, this could have been like a generic default whenever you apply an instance from one screen to the other on tap. It should adapt to it. Considering this day and age, you should have like an adaptability in terms of, you know, the system kind of figuring out what you're trying to do and suggest an element there. So, and it'll be easier to kind of remove this element, for example, as I was saying before earlier, that, you know, if this element was added automatically, you can probably change that right away rather than adding this and then probably playing around with it. I'm sure you can get used to all of this effort, but I guess, I mean, it's just easier to have this default state somehow. Maybe they have some sort of like a batch or a template, some along those lines. As you, they do have templates, of course, so you can create these boilerplates where you can, if you're doing something consistently across, you know, a certain application or whatever you're trying to work on, you probably can build a template and then just keep on changing the images and whatnot. I'm sure, but still, an idea like, for example, if you're doing it for the first time, they should give out like a default animation somehow. This element should automatically pop up and just be inserted defaultly.
Transition to occur when we tap the photo, not just when we press down. Try connecting the tap output of the interaction patch to the number input of the pop animation. You'll see that it's triggering, but it's not holding that state. That's because a tap lasts for 1 frame when you release your finger. To do that, we need to add a switch patch to our patch editor. Double tap on the patch editor, type define switch, and then press return. Like we did with the pop animation, let's insert this between the other patches. Let's connect the tap output of our interaction patch to the input of our switch, and then connect the output of our switch to the number input of our pop animation. Alright, let's give that a go. You'll see now that whenever we tap, that triggers a flip on the switch patch, which doesn't flip back until we tap again. Our transitions stay at 1 progress until we flip back to the other by tapping once more. You'll see now that whenever we tap, that triggers a flip on the switch patch, which doesn't flip back until we tap again. Our transition stays at 1 progress until we flip back to the other by tapping once more. The 4 patches that you see here make up the bulk of your prototyping in Origami, so once you get used to using them, you'll be up and running. Let's finish up our prototype. We can reuse the same chain of patches to animate the opacity of the info group as well as the artboard background. Let's start with the transition for the info group opacity. Double tap on the patch editor to bring up the patch library. Start typing transition, and then press return. We can connect the existing output of our pop animation patch to the progress input of our transition patch. We want our info group to start at an opacity of 0 and end at 1, so the defaults here are actually perfect already. Let's connect the output of the transition patch to the opacity property of our info group. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. Lastly, let's add the transition for the artboard background color. We're going to try.
That's pretty unique how you can, I'm not sure how I remember using this in any other tool, but you can probably see it's pretty interesting how you can connect it with the contextual bar menu sort of element over here, and it's pretty neat like how he actually dragged this onto the opacity tab over here in the text field, and it's pretty interesting, right? The handle
Transition
is nice.
the background from white when it's zoomed out to black
Very
when
intuitive,
it's
I guess.
zoomed in. Double tap on the patch editor, start typing transition, and then press return. By default, the transition patch is going to transition between 2 numbers, but we want it to transition between 2 colors. We can do this by clicking on the header of our transition patch. This will bring up a drop-down to change the type of transition. We're going to select color. You'll see that this brings up 2 color swatches for the start and end values of our transition patch. Let's change this so that the start color when our photo is zoomed out is white, and our end color when our photo is zoomed in is black. Like before, let's connect the progress output of the pop animation patch to the progress input of the transition patch. Now let's connect the output of the transition patch to the background color property of the artboard in the inspector panel. You can see now that as you interact with the prototype, it transitions the background color from white when the photo is scaled down to black when the photo is zoomed in. Like I was saying earlier, these 4 patches make up the bulk of your prototyping in Origami. Have a look at the examples from this tutorial and later tutorials, and these will soon become second nature.
So this is what it is, right? And prototyping tool, essentially. And I think there's a lot of effort involved, and probably there should be an exporting ability. As I said, I'm exploring this with you guys right now. I have no idea. I'm completely blinded, gone and blind, basically. Sorry, doing this. So that, but it's pretty interesting how it's being done. Some of the features, some of the interactions here are very intuitive. Not to say that this is a lot of effort to just get a simple animation done. I think there are better tools I've used which are much quite adaptable. But as if this gives the designers the ability to export the animation somehow, which can be translated into a coder friendly format, then probably it's worth the effort. Again, it depends upon what the requirement is. I never had the need for a tool like this, which is so extensive, to do prototyping on this level. But it depends upon the company and then where you at and what you're trying to do at that point. It's all about this. Anyway, so yeah, so we looked at basically getting started, and then we have previewing and sharing. We can look at that as well, but what else do we have? We have multiple states, masking layers. So I think essentially what this is going to do is uh, you can use this amazing tool to build a very intricate prototype for not just for stakeholders to show off what you've been doing, or even, as I said, for potential investors. But I think this can be used for users testing as well. If you want to do like intricate, I don't usually do user testing with a very like if it's a already operating tool, an application on an existing application. It's a different story, but I don't do prototypes on that intricate level. I haven't done user testing on that level. I usually do like very scrappy, either it's like a wireframe or maybe a simplistic markup design where they've been stitched together as we used to do on InVision. Not that many different changes there, like basically page to page transition. This is very intricate. I haven't done on that sort of level. I think it defeats the purpose because refinement becomes a little bit of a friction in the end of the day. With user testing, there's like a formative design process where you try to refine and iterate things consistently. I think it becomes a bone of contention when you're doing it on such an intricate level, on such detail. So this leaves me thinking like this is probably just to showcase to stakeholders on a massive scale, big projects like Facebook, where you have an endless team of people working on multiple products across different tangents. I think this might work. This is a good tool for that. Otherwise, but I like the idea that you can move things from sketch and sorry, not InVision, sketch and Figma. So that's very friggin' important. This your prototyping tool, you need to do that. I'm sure you guys must have used in principle before. If not, try checking it out as well. If But origami seems like a very comprehensive tool to do your fair bidding of prototyping and design and animation and interaction design. This is very interesting. So I'll explore it further, maybe in following videos. I'll follow it up, but this is becoming a very long video, I guess, to what I'm usually accustomed to. But I'll dive into this and probably create a board where I don't have it right now because I went in blind, as I said. But what in the next video, what we can do is a follow up for this one. Is we can create another basically a design that we can pull off from the design Figma community or somewhere else, or maybe whatever book I already own, I've already done as a prototype or something like this. So maybe I can use those designs and then do an interaction on this like a full blown. And I'll go in blind, but I'll do the whole exercise of creating a prototype using the tutorials and yeah, live in flesh. Not live in flesh, but I'm generally like going in blind and then making sure. It'll just be a journey as trying to learn things while you're at it, and probably using my previous knowledge of using these kind of tools, animation tools, like Principle or Adobe Animate and things like that, basically. Yeah. So guys, catch you on the next video soon, and I'll make another one, as I said again. But for now, I think this is pretty much it. I already gotta wrap it up. It's already 24 minutes, or maybe more in. yeah, once I stitch this up, it's going to become a very long video. It's going to become a little boring, just more than boring than my usual videos with my endless rambling. But yeah, that's I think that we can wrap it up now, and we'll catch you on the next video. Bye. Take care.